I'm really excited to have Hannah Richardson with us today who's a women's health physio from the Pelvic Studio. She's also a hockey player herself, and a mum of two. And she's going to be sharing firsthand her experience as a physio, as an athlete, and what we can do to better support women in high impact sports. So today's going to help us better understand pelvic floor health in sport, recognize some of the warning signs, things that we shouldn't ignore, and some practical things that we can take away, no matter what your level of involvement is in sport. So please join me today in welcoming Hannah, and we will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Philippa, and welcome everyone. Thanks for having me. As Philippa said, I'm a passionate pelvic health physio that really enjoys educating people about pelvic health because it is a topic that is very common and is not talked about enough. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight today, particularly into pelvic health and sport, and gives you some ways around making this conversation more known about and more easier for women to access. So imagine you're part of a team, you're the coach, you've had a player return from having a baby. They've been playing really well, back to their 100%. They've returned safely from having a baby. Recently, though, at trainings, you've noticed that, they're slowing down with the change of direction stuff. They're having to modify burpees that you might have introduced as a punishment to the team. That's often what I find in my sport sometimes brought in. And then they're often going to the toilet before or after trainings. And then, suddenly that player decides to stop playing. And, you're thinking, oh, maybe they're a mum, they're just busy, they don't have time anymore. But it's probably that you didn't connect or notice all those other things that probably led up to that moment. And was there something else that was going on that made this woman stop playing? And the reality is that lots of athletes experience pelvic floor dysfunction. So what we know is that 1 in 3 women will experience pelvic floor dysfunction. That's just in general, not in sport. But the current evidence shows us that pelvic floor dysfunction is a lot higher in athletes, particularly for urinary incontinence, which I'll go into a bit further down the track. And for those athletes that play those higher impact sports, we're talking things like gymnastics, netball, hockey, those type of sports, trampolining, those type of sports will often have higher incidences of pelvic floor dysfunction as well. Most women never tell anyone of their symptoms. They usually stay silent, try to manage it as best they can until then they can't manage it, and then that's when they will stop participating in sport or exercise. It's often thought that, leakage is just part of being a woman, particularly after you've had children. It's just something that happens. Leakage is common, but it is not normal. Okay. It can happen to anyone at any stage in their lifetime as well. So there's this kind of, myth out there that, once you have kids, your pelvic floor is shot. That's not the case. People that haven't had children can experience leakage. So that's something to remember as well, not to just kind of have that pregnancy or post-natal woman in mind in regards to pelvic floor. In fact, in the adolescence age group, there is a high incidence of urinary incontinence in particular. We don't know exactly the percentage because it's underreported and also under-researched in that population. But what we do know is that 90% of that population don't report their symptoms and also don't know what the pelvic floor is or anything about the pelvic floor. And so often, they're suffering in silence, not knowing, what to do in regards to their symptoms. So if we don't start talking about pelvic health, we can't be surprised if women start, reducing their participation or stopping in sport. A couple of things that I just wanted to go over to kind of give you a little bit of background in some of the different types of pelvic floor dysfunction that can impact women, particularly in sport, because often we kind of go to that bladder leakage, but that's one. Yes, there are a couple of others as well that can also impact women with sporting participation. So the first one I want to chat about is pelvic organ prolapse. So this is where one of the three pelvic organs, so your bladder, your uterus, or your bowel, can sit a little bit lower in the vaginal cavity. And usually it's because the tissues that normally hold those organs up have just become stretched or weakened, and makes them sit that little bit lower. Often women will experience symptoms like heaviness, pressure, a bulge sensation in the vagina. It can cause bladder or bowel issues as well. And often when these structures are put under more load, those symptoms tend to be more noticeable. So if we think about sport is definitely loading that area a little bit more. So often women that might have a prolapse might notice their symptoms a little bit more when they're putting themselves under that heavier load. Now, if you're a woman that then starts to suddenly have these symptoms, first thing you would kind of do is jump on Google, as we all kind of do with a lot of medical things these days, to kind of find out more about your symptoms and what it could be. And when you pop on Google and you kind of search your symptoms, some of this stuff can be quite alarming that women can read. And it often tells them what they should avoid doing. And often one of those things is avoiding sport. So if they're a runner, it tells them to stop running. And so often women will see that and go, okay, right, I should just stop, which is not the case at all. Often, if they get the right help and support, particularly through someone like myself, a pelvic health physio, these women can go back to playing the sport at the same level they were at prior to having these symptoms. So having a prolapse shouldn't prevent a woman from participating. They essentially just need to get the right support to help them participate in that regard and enjoy the activity that they want to do, rather than having to miss out due to their symptoms. The next is urinary incontinence. So this is the bladder leakage, and there's two different types of bladder leakage. The first one, which most people are kind of aware of, is what we call stress incontinence. And this is where when you cough or sneeze, you notice that little bit of leakage. It can also happen with certain movements like jumping, skipping, running, those type of things, which are more kind of that sporting base. And so often it's that uncontrolled leakage of that happening when there's more impact on the bladder. The other type of urinary incontinence is what we call urge urinary incontinence. So this is when suddenly you'll get this strong urge where you've got to empty your bladder, and essentially you've got no time and you've got to race to get to the toilet. And sometimes on the way to the toilet, you'll get a bit of leakage as well. So they're the two main types. And if a woman's often experiencing these symptoms, usually they'll try and manage or modify things to kind of help in ways. And usually what they'll do is, going to the toilet before, maybe during training or during a session, and even afterwards. I've been involved with many hockey teams over my journey, and often you'll notice after a warm up there'll be a long line for the toilets when women get back into the change rooms. So that could be something that women do. They might, again, if they're a runner, they might plan their run out. So if they know that, okay, if I do this track, there's a toilet halfway that I can use if I need to. And then also when I get back to the car park, there's another toilet that I can use. So I prefer doing that running track rather than kind of doing other running tracks that I don't know if there's going to be a toilet stop along the way. They will wear pads to help. And the other thing that's come onto the market in the last couple of years is period undies. as well. So often they might use period undies as well to help with bladder leakage, to manage that throughout the session. And then in regards to things like jumping, lifting, squatting, things like that, they might either omit those from their session and just modify, or limit the range or the weight that they might be lifting at due to that leakage as well. Um, Often women get quite anxious about that leakage as well, which is totally understandable. And then that anxiousness will often build and make that, particularly the urge incontinence, a lot worse too. Often that anxiety creeps in a lot with the urge incontinence as well. And the last one that I want to touch on is pelvic pain. So pelvic pain is any kind of pain, discomfort felt in the kind of lower abdomen, pelvic region. It can have many kind of drivers or causes to it. One that's been in the media a lot lately is endometriosis, which can be a big driver of that. There are lots of other causes as well to that kind of chronic pelvic pain presentation. Also, women can experience pain around their cycle as well, which we would regard as period pain too. So this can often impact their level of training at particular times in the month as well. Not always associated around kind of the menstruation cycle, but more often than not it is. So often women around that time of their cycle might have to reduce their training load. They might experience more fatigue. They might have to modify things due to pain. They often feel guilty for missing training sessions, particularly if it's happening, every month with that cycle. That guilt kind of builds on them, and it can often be seen as they're having sessions off every month. That if someone didn't have the understanding of why they were having that session off, they might be perceived as being lazy or skipping out type of thing, where they're doing it because they physically can't participate. So keeping that in mind as well. The other thing with menstruation is how women manage that during sports. If they've got a particularly heavy flow, how are they going to manage that, particularly if they're a water-based sport? Thinking about things like that can be pretty distressing for women. So sometimes it's easier, just to not participate during that time that you are bleeding, and just step back and wait until that's finished, and then kind of reintroduce the training or the session back in. And then I spoke a little bit about that fatigue or running on low battery, which if athletes kind of push through that, then their recovery is going to be a lot less. And so, they might be at that lower training level for a lot longer if they're kind of pushing through that pain in that regards. And some athletes do push through the pain because they don't want to have that guilt feeling as well. So creating a supportive environment where knowing that at certain times in the month you might need to reduce your training loads or modify them in some way to support your body can be really, really helpful. So they're the main factors affecting pelvic floor dysfunction. Then the other thing I wanted to touch on was there are several kind of key life stages in women, and at each life stage there are certain barriers that might impact how women can participate in sport and exercise. So if we start kind of from the beginning, that adolescence kind of stage where puberty is starting, Often they can get a rapid change in how their body is looking due to those hormonal changes, which with those rapid changes in body but also hormones, it can create a lot of change in the body. It can change the forces and the pressures throughout the body, and that can then change those forces and pressures on the pelvic floor. So they might not have had symptoms before puberty, and then suddenly puberty's come in, and now they're noticing symptoms due to those changes. Also, with the start of menstruation, hopefully they've been able to have a conversation with someone about how to manage that. But not all women do have that support. So, once menstruation starts, if they don't know or have that support on how to manage that, then that can be really tricky in entering that or continuing with that sport if that's not well managed, or they had the support to help them manage that too. So they're the challenges that can create for young athletes. Then we kind of look at pregnancy. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there in regards to pregnancy and exercise. And again, probably a lot of information on the internet that, can mislead women into thinking that it might not be safe to exercise in pregnancy. But what we know is that exercise can be really beneficial in pregnancy. Yes, there are certain stages in pregnancy where exercise may need to be adjusted and modified, but it's usually really quite small. Often we see a lot of pregnancy people here. We have people running throughout their pregnancy, and they can be running all the way up until those late weeks of their pregnancy as well. So it's perfectly safe to be exercising during your pregnancy. A lot of people kind of don't know or have that support on what to do in their pregnancy. So often they go, oh, it's probably best I just stop and don't continue exercising anymore because I don't know what's safe and what's not. Where if they seek that help and support, then often they'll be able to continue some type of exercise throughout their pregnancy. By maintaining exercise throughout pregnancy, it has lots of benefits, not only for birth, but also for that period post-birth. It can help women get back to exercise a lot quicker and help that transition to be a lot smoother as well. Then we come into the postpartum kind of life stage where women have had their baby, and how they return to sport can be they need to have that support there again to know what to do at what stage. So during the early stages post-birth, absolutely we want to let the woman's body recover and slowly introduce some gentle exercise. Then over the weeks and months, we want to gradually increase that exercise and eventually get them back to whatever their goal might be for exercise down the track. And everyone's goal is different. In regards to things. Some women just want to get back to the gym, where some women want to get back to playing netball or that more higher impact kind of sport as well. But often the challenges that we see in this space is that they've got a lot of pelvic floor changes from, birthing through pregnancy, all of that. So monitoring and managing that. They're often sleep deprived. They're looking after a newborn. Often they're sleep deprived, fatigue levels are low, so managing that in the exercise space as well, where sometimes, women just go, it's too hard, I can't find the time or the space or a supportive environment that I can exercise in. So they stop exercising. Yeah. Sorry, was that not a question?
No, keep going.
Cool. And then, how to exercise with a baby. It's not as easy as just popping the baby on the ground and then doing your exercise session. So figuring out ways, and I would say the space in where women can exercise with their children is growing. I think it's still got the capacity to be much more supportive, um, but I think it could still grow in that space. Yeah. Um, then we've got the perimenopause and menopausal stage. So throughout this stage, hormones are shifting dramatically for women, and they're often noticing lots of different changes all over their body, not just kind of pelvic floor related. Um, but in regards to pelvic floor, due to that big hormone shift and estrogen levels dropping, often women will notice changes and symptoms that might appear that they've never had before, like urinary incontinence. So managing that for them so that they can still participate in whatever activity they might be doing is important as well. As well as that, that's kind of the population where you're getting more, aches and pains in joints and muscles as well. And so managing that in regards to their exercise too can be important in that regard. And if you think about it, so I've talked about 4 different life stages. That's actually a lot of women's lives. And so there's barriers at each stage. So if we can break down those barriers at the different stages in a woman's life, then that's going to mean that they can participate in sport and activity, um, you know, without having to face all those barriers. Um, Next thing I kind of want to chat about is what sporting clubs, associations, coaches, team managers might be able to do to help um, make people aware of pelvic health and kind of let people know that it's a common thing and that it's treatable. It can be treated so that you can get back to whatever your goal might be. Um, but the issue is pelvic health is a difficult topic to raise. You know, people come in to see me and I essentially I can be more direct because they're coming in because of a pelvic floor concern that they have. Where if I saw someone on the street, I wouldn't kind of ask, "Oh, how are your bladder and your bowels?" Um, you have to generalize it a little bit more when you're kind of talking about it in groups or outside of a setting. Like, for example, when a setting like this where people come in to see me and things like that. So that makes it a little bit trickier. If you think about a sporting field where someone might injure themselves and they come off and you can visibly see, they've injured their knee or their ankle and stuff like that. You can ask them, "Oh, did you hurt your ankle?" And they may go, "Yeah, I rolled my ankle." And you kind of have a bit of a chat about that, where someone has to kind of stop because their pelvic floor, they're probably not going to openly tell you, "Yeah, I've got to stop because I've got some leakage." And it's same goes, you're probably not going to ask, "Oh, did you stop because you got some leakage?" So it's tricky in that sense, which is probably why it's a bit of a topic that isn't spoken about as much. So if we kind of think about broader ways to kind of include it in those sporting environments, things you can do, posters. So you can look at finding some posters. I had a bit of a quick squeeze at the Continence Foundation Australia. They have some posters, fact sheets, things like that, which you can access for free. And putting those up kind of on the back of toilet doors, in the change rooms, those type of places where women can kind of see and maybe have a quick read and then go, "Oh, hey, I have some of those symptoms. Where can I go? What can I do to help in that regard?" Education sessions. So setting up some education sessions within your team or sporting association where you have a professional come in and talk about pelvic health. It might be something where you get lots of different kind of education sessions happening throughout the year of lots of different things, and one of them is on pelvic health. So looking at that. If you're in a sporting association where you give out things to members like packs or things like that. You might have a flyer that talks about pelvic health, why it's important, how and where to access further information if you're noticing symptoms. So that can be something to look at. I know our sporting club do an email out to members. So that's another avenue that you could pop it in a section about pelvic health. Again, why it's important, how to access or who to access if you're having troubles in that regard. Other things to think about as well is having access to females having access to private change rooms as well, which is not always easy because it is not a quick and easy fix. Popping up a poster, quick and easy, but if there's potential to have access to private change rooms for females, that's good. Another thing is thinking about female toilets. Having access to sanitary bins in all toilets can be really important. I know in our sporting association a couple of years ago, they had just little bins. They weren't sanitary bins, just little bins, and they were only in some of the toilets. And so there wasn't an appropriate place for women to kind of dispose of, pads and tampons, or they had to kind of use specific toilets to be able to do that. So, it wasn't until, a female member recognised this issue and brought it to the attention of the association. And at the time, it was probably more a male-dominant association, which, had no idea that, there wasn't sanitary bins in the toilet. There are now sanitary bins in all toilets in the sporting association that I'm involved with now. But yeah, if everyone stayed silent, then that issue wouldn't have kind of been resolved, and could have been a barrier to some women kind of participating. So thinking about things like that as well, rather than, if you're noticing that, rather than saying silent, kind of saying, hey, how about we look at doing this in that regard? If you're a coach or a team manager involved with a team, having a bit of a basic understanding of pelvic health and, menstruation and things like that. You don't have to have the answers whatsoever, but just having that understanding so that if someone kind of says to you, yeah, hey, I've got to step out for women's reasons, you can kind of create a supportive environment and things like that. And then if you're noticing that kind of happening, a few times, then you might say, hey, maybe it might be worth, looking further into that and saying, you could go here, or here's some information about where you might be able to seek help in that regard. I know my hockey team have a team chat, which I'm sure these days with technology, most teams probably do have that kind of aspect, have the team chat, whether it's on Messenger or other platforms as well. And you might utilize this if you're kind of one of those leaders in the team, to kind of pop in there a little bit about pelvic health, and you might kind of again generalize it, and you might have each month you might just pop in something about, 1 month is mental health, 1 month might be nutrition and recovery, so that you're not kind of solely just focusing on pelvic health, because there's lots of things that you can focus on in those sessions. So, having a pelvic health one and just saying, what the common symptoms might be, and that, it's not normal to have leakage, and that there's, people out there who can help, and giving them, again, that avenue of, okay, where can I go to find the help that I might need? And that way it's not individualized, you're just generalizing it, and then women can then seek help from there as well. Women are more likely as well to open up to teammates if they feel they've got that good social connection with them too. Um, so providing social opportunities for women's team off the field or outside of whatever sport or exercise it might be can be really helpful because they then might feel more comfortable to tell their teammate, hey, I leak when I take off, and those type of things. And then, that gives them an environment where they can share what they're noticing. And, the other person might go, hey, I used to. And then, I went to see a physio and they kind of helped. I think you should go and see one, things like that. So, yeah, creating those social opportunities for women can then help open the avenues for conversation up as well. Um, and then looking at being inclusive for all the different life stages of women. So we spoke about the life stages of that kind of postnatal population and returning to sport. Again, I'll talk about the association, the hockey environment where I'm involved in. They've recently brought in walking hockey. And when you think of walking hockey, you probably think older age group. But why not postnatal women? If their goal is to get back to hockey, then that's a nice little stepping stone where they can, go along, have a bit of a game of walking hockey, which then will give them the confidence, hey, I can do it walking. That's great. Next step is kind of building to that, back into the hockey where I can be running. So having that inclusivity can help, which works for some sports, not all sports. But if there's the possibility to kind of introduce something similar, you might look at doing that. And then if we also think about the life stage of the perimenopausal, postmenopausal woman, where, running might be a little bit trickier for them with, aches and pains and things like that. They can still participate in the sport by just reducing that level of impact for them as well. So that's kind of talking about how you can bring in pelvic health by talking about it in a generalized kind of format. Then the next thing I want to talk about is how you might be able to include pelvic health without athletes knowing you're including pelvic health. So ways that you can do, and this is more probably at a kind of coaching type of level rather than association type of level. So the first one is thinking about breathing. And there's two types of breathing that you want to kind of think about. The first type is thinking about breathing in related to kind of strength-based exercise. So when we breath hold, when we do a strength exercise like a weighted squat or an overhead press, something like that, if we breath hold, then that's going to put more pressure on our pelvic floor, which then can make us more prone to potentially getting some leakage. So if you're kind of doing a strength session with your team or exercise session, you might just remind all the athletes that are doing it, hey, remember to breathe out when you lift the weight, or when you squat down, remember to breathe. And all you're doing is giving them a reminder of remembering to breathe, but it's also going to help with the pressures that are placed on their pelvic floor as well. So that can be a subtle one, but one that can just help in that regard. The other one is breathing in kind of a relaxation kind of sense that you might incorporate into your cool down. And we're talking about kind of diaphragmatic breathing, which is taking deep breaths into kind of the side of your ribs or into your belly. And this can help the pelvic floor to kind of move and relax off. which sometimes what we want. Sometimes women can have that overactivity in their pelvic floor, particularly in athletes. They will have more tightness in their pelvic floor. And by doing the deep breathing, that can then help the pelvic floor to relax off. Okay. So you might kind of do a bit of a stretching session at the end of your training. And then you might just include a minute where you're just lying down on the ground, just breathing, popping hands on belly, just taking some nice deep breaths all the way into the belly, feeling the belly rise, and then a long, slow breath out, feeling the belly fall. So that can help with pelvic floor. It can help with lots of other things too. Breathing is really good. So it has lots of benefits as well. Then the other thing is that can help with pelvic floor without kind of alluding to it helping with pelvic floor is stretching. Particularly around kind of the pelvic region. So the stretches that I would kind of be thinking about including in a session would be like a butterfly pose stretch where heels are together, knees are out wide, and you're kind of letting the legs fall and feeling that stretch through the inner thighs. You can incorporate some deep breathing while they hold in that position as well. Also in a standing position, doing kind of a side lunge, feeling that stretch through the inner thigh area, because the inner thigh muscles are closely related to the pelvic floor. So doing that, a hip flexor stretch as well, kind of in that lunge position, can be a really nice one to help open up through the pelvis. And then I'd be including lots of glute stretching too. Glutes, again, are very closely related to the pelvic floor. So glutes are a really nice one to do. And you might even kind of do like a child's pose stretch. And again, in that child's pose stretch, you can do some nice deep breathing as well. So bringing in some stretching can really help with the pelvic floor as well. And you might even kind of make it a regular thing in your team that when you cool down, you do, these 4 to 5 stretches and aim them at that. Then thinking about focusing the session the training, not just around fitness. So fitness is definitely important in regards to, being able to run out again and things like that. So still having that element in there, but then also looking at focusing on movement and strength and functional support, essentially. So having good landing mechanics, good trunk control, good hip control can all help support the pelvic floor. So if a woman is stronger when she, goes to land in netball on that kind of firm surface, if she's got the strength there, then that's going to be less loading on her pelvic floor. So she's less likely to leak. Where if she hasn't had that strength, then, she might be more prone to having that leak due to those pressures being different on her pelvic floor. So having that strength brought in can be really helpful. And the areas that we kind of look for with that strength is the inner thigh area. So our adductors and strengthening those. And then the other area would be the abductors, so the outside of the hip, things like glutes and stuff like that. So being stronger in those areas can really help manage different loads on the pelvic floor, which can be really important, particularly in those higher level sports, which is where we see more of that urinary incontinence be present. So thinking about that a little bit as well. That's kind of my summary of things. I've got a couple of case studies that I can go through as well, or if there's any questions, we can look at doing that now.
Thanks, Hannah. That's amazing. So many useful tips in there. I down a bunch of questions and you've answered them as we went. But if anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat here or take yourself off mute. One question I have, when should someone see a physio? And can you tell us what a typical visit might actually look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So when should someone see a physio? Anytime, really. So even if you don't have symptoms, it can be great to just check in and know what your pelvic floor is doing, particularly if you might kind of be looking to increase training load or something like that. Yeah, it's always good to know what your pelvic floor is doing because it's a muscle that we don't ever think about or train until there's an issue. So knowing what your pelvic floor is doing is really good. Pelvic floor training, often people kind of think of Kegels. Um, Kegels is not the only type of pelvic floor training. There's a mix of what people's pelvic floors can look like. Sometimes they can be weak and need to be strengthened. Sometimes they can be strong and need to actually relax more. So unless you know what your pelvic floor is doing, you might not be doing the right exercise for your pelvic floor. So sometimes just getting that advice, even if you don't have symptoms, can be really good. If you are noticing symptoms, I'd say jump on as soon as you notice symptoms, because the longer that you leave your symptoms without actioning them, um, it means that it'll be slightly longer in the recovery as well. So the sooner, the better. Oh, and the other part of the question, sorry. What a typical pelvic health appointment will look like? Often people are really nervous before they come in. That's completely normal and expected from us. We kind of know that it's a little bit of a anxiety provoking thing to be discussing. So we take that into consideration. What it will look like is usually just a chat, first of all. And how that chat goes kind of depends on how much you're willing to share. And often we'll kind of ask questions around kind of your bladder stuff, your bowel stuff. We ask about exercise, lots of kind of lifestyle factors as well. Things like your work and what positions you're usually in for your work and things like that. So we kind of get a nice picture in just that chat. And then in regards to finding out a little bit more about your pelvic floor, there's kind of a couple of ways that we can assess the pelvic floor. The first way is just through an ultrasound where we use our ultrasound machine and we just place it on the belly. And then we can have a look through into the bladder and we can see the pelvic floor at the base of the bladder. This gives us we can often see if you can lift your pelvic floor, if you can relax your pelvic floor, those type of things. It doesn't tell us if it's a little bit tight or overactive or how much strength you have or whether you need to work on relaxing it more. So it's limited, but it still gives us information. Then the other way to assess the pelvic floor is through an internal vaginal exam, which just requires a single digit, and we then can assess lots about the pelvic floor. We can look and grade it, the strength of the pelvic floor. We can see how well you're relaxing the pelvic floor. We can tell if there's tightness in the pelvic floor. Lots of different things that we can then really tailor your pelvic floor training towards you and what your pelvic floor needs. And so then we'll often send you off with some homework to be doing to help if you do have symptoms.
Sorry, just finding the audio button there. Thank you. That's really great. If you have any other questions, pop them in now. We're right on time. And so we want you all to get back to work or finish your lunch if you haven't been eating while we've been doing this. But thank you so much, Hannah. This has been great. And even the Pelvic Studio, an amazing source of knowledge. I'll just put some links in here as well so you can check them out too. But yeah, if you can give Hannah some love in the comments for joining us today, we really appreciate all of your insights. You've covered so much, and so many great physios are happy to work with different sporting clubs wherever you are. So reach out to them. It's so valuable to be able to do that.
And I guess my key take homes would be pelvic floor symptoms are common, but not normal and are treatable. So knowing that. Don't, as a sporting coach association, all of that, we don't expect you to diagnose, but creating a supportive environment to enhance the conversation around pelvic health would be great, essentially. And yeah, if you do notice symptoms, seek help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah. And the Pelvic Floor Studio actually partners with Womensport and Rep Tasmania. So if you are a member, you can get a discount on a consultation there and even off the classes that they offer. So if you're under 18, you can join for free. Adults are just $20. And we have other perks on there too. But we love the opportunity to be able to work with you guys.